Okay, so welcome to the first lecture of Engineering Econ. In this lecture, we're going to kind of talk about the role of engineering economic analysis and decision making. We're going to talk about rational decision making and discuss that process. And then we'll kind of introduce and discuss a little bit of this concept called the triple bottom line thinking and this new way of looking at I guess, costs associated with infrastructure and how we might make decisions based on, I guess you'd call them soft costs, things that aren't easily put um, into dollar amounts, right? So let's start out and we'll talk about what engineering economics is. Well, according to Wikipedia, right, it's fundamentally engineering economics involves formulating, estimating, and evaluating the economic outcomes when alternatives to accomplish a defined purpose are available. So what does that even really mean? Well, it means basically making decisions, right? And making decisions using dollars, right? And other things, but mainly, looking at ways to make decisions and using the cost as one of those decision variables. So you might say, well, why is this class useful to me? Well, on the simple side, right, we might be able to look at things like calculating annual credit card interest for a given balance. So if you had $500 on your credit card for a year, how much do you have to shell out to the evil corporation, right? A more complicated question that we might be able to answer with the different material you learn in this class would be, should we pick a concrete or an asphalt driveway, right? And so I had a senior design team that looked at boat ramps for a town near just south of Madison where they have a river trail, right? And so we were trying to look at for Belleville, right, whether or not we should put in concrete or asphalt boat ramps. Concrete has more capital cost or upfront costs, right? And asphalt kind of has lower upfront costs but more maintenance costs associated with it. So which one would be better, right? Or a home mortgage loan. Which kind of mortgage loan should we get? Should we get a 30-year or 15-year? Should we get something that balloons? Should we get, how much money should we put down? So now we're talking about multiple variables and looking at something maybe over the life cycle cost of either a loan or infrastructure that we're placing, right? And then we could get really complicated, right? When we'll start to kind of look at these complex topics like, well, what's the triple bottom line for a new dam? Is this dam, does it do good by the people, do good by the environment, and do good for profit? And how do we quantify those things and show it, right? So that'd be a pretty complicated thing. Or maybe replacing all of the light bulbs in Ottensman Hall with LED light bulbs, right? Or should we put a new green roof or a new wind turbine in an area, right? Should I open a new manufacturing facility in a different city, and what are the economic impacts of that, right? Those would be kind of complicated questions that we might be able to start looking at how we could begin to analyze some of those with material from this class. Okay, so some categories of analysis, right? We might say, is it worthwhile, right? So is this decision worthwhile? Is this project worthwhile, right? We might be able to answer that. Let's say we've got multiple projects. Which one should have a higher priority, right? We could try and answer that. Are all of my design alternatives for a single project, are they all equal or are they different? Is there one that is preferred just based on how the economics shake out? We might be able to answer, how can we achieve our own financial goals? So in this class, we can talk about, planning for retirement, paying off school loans, paying or buying a home. These are all important things. So we'll learn, methods that can help you achieve some of your own personal financial goals. How do we balance operational and capital expenditures, right? This goes back to a concrete versus asphalt, let's say, driveway. Do we want to be paying maintenance periodically over time with a lower upfront cost, or we want to pay money up front and have to not worry about regular maintenance going forward, right? And how do we balance those things? Or I like to think about a new car versus a junker car, right? One's going to have lots of operation and maintenance, but low capital expenditures. The other one might have upfront capital expenditures, but very low maintenance over the life of that vehicle, right? So we might be able to put this in the context of risk as well. And then kind of the last thing that is important to talk about is the status quo the best alternative? So that's kind of related to, is it worthwhile? And when I say status quo, it just means, is what we are currently doing or what we currently have, is that just the best alternative? Do we need to do anything different, right? So let's say I have a hydropower facility and it's been there for 50 years, and one option is just to leave it there. Another option might be to remove it. Another option might be to improve it, right? Removing it and improving it might be far more costly than just doing what we're doing now, right? So sometimes the status quo might just be the best alternative. So it's important to kind of frame things around that and have a baseline. So I think of this class as having two sides, right? We've got the stuff you need for the FE and the PE exam. That's all the math, right? And some of the terminology. In this class, mathematically, it's not a, I'll say maybe it's a little tricky and some of the concepts are subtle, but it's, it's not a brain bleeding like your calc series or differential equations, right? So there's this mathematical aspect that you need to know, and you need to know how to use these equations and tables to carry out certain analyses, right? And so that's the stuff you need for the FE and PE. But I think the more important part of the class, and I'll try, we'll try to go through this with some examples, and then, hopefully with a project that you carry out in the class as well, is the concept of decision making. When we look at different alternatives, how do we make decisions when we have uncertainty in some of those alternatives? How does politics and other societal factors come into play in decision making, etc. So, engineering econ, the real important part of it and the real important part of decision making, it's really all a part two. And hopefully we'll look at some case studies and do some other things where we can kind of see some of those nuances and how people can make decisions even when it seems like it might be really hard to do so. Okay, so a brief overview of the class here. We got a lot to cover, right? And as I mentioned before, although mathematically not as challenging, right, maybe as some of the other courses that you have taken or will be taking, the concepts, they can be subtle and tricky. So it's important to spend a lot of time working the examples, rewatching the videos as necessary, and always filling out your notes. Be sure to leverage all the resources that are available to you. So, peers, instructor, online resources, a textbook, homework problems, etc. Right? Do what you need to do well in the class. Right now, it's tentatively scheduled that there's one semester project, and that's kind of your chance to synthesize what you've learned and apply it to the real world, right? And we'll discuss that. In this class, there are 2 to 3 exams. It depends on the format and time that we have available, right? And so typically it's 2 exams. Depending on how that goes, it could be 3 exams. And that allows you to demonstrate to me your understanding of the material. And then the last piece is that we will have a final comprehensive exam. Now, people get really worried about that. They say, oh, is comprehensive, it's so much material. And I say, this is a class that everything stacks on what we learn on day 1. So if you don't understand the concepts after day 1 and day 2 and day 3, you're going to be in a lot of trouble, because every other concept, it stacks on top of that, right? And all the methods that we learn, we just apply them in different ways throughout the entire semester. So the comprehensive exam isn't really, it's not like we have some block of material that we do in the first half of the class that we never talk about later. Instead, it's the opposite. The stuff you learn in the first half of the exam, you're using every period and for every homework and every quiz until we get to the last part of the class. So it's comprehensive, but really it's, the class itself is comprehensive. You need to know what we've got in the beginning, and you need to still be able to apply it at the very end. Okay, so here's kind of a flow chart of our path, and then I'm going to end this lecture chunk. So, today this lecture module is going to focus on terminology, right, and decision making, and the next lecture chunk, the next lecture module, will focus more specifically on terminology. And then we're going to spend some time, let's say if it was 2 units worth of time, right, talking about interest and the time value of money. We'll get into talking about cash flow series. That's one of the most important boxes on here. You really need to understand cash flow series and the math that goes with that. And then we'll take what we've learned and begin discussing our big 3 analysis tools: present worth analysis, annual analysis, and rate of return analysis. And that's really half of the class right there. And those 3 tools are really, the meat and the essence of what you need to get out of this class. And everything else kind of then sits on top of that first part of the class, being able to understand time value of money, how we use it in cash flow series, and how we conduct analysis using different tools. After that, then we kind of look at how we can compare different alternatives using those tools. What are some of the other analysis techniques that are similar to those tools? And then we try to make the use of those tools more real by discussing things like depreciation, tax analysis, inflation, and then some other mixed topics. But all of those other things in the second half of the course, all of these things here, they all sit on top of your understanding of these 3 fundamental concepts. So it's very important, before we move over here, that we have a very good understanding here, because all of these rely on using those. Okay, so that's it for the first lecture chunk. We'll finish up. The second lecture chunk is relatively short, and we'll just go into talking about decision making a little bit.